Hello and welcome back to the shop. Last time I was here, we got the front end off of our donor car. The sheet metal is now laying on the floor, and my goal while I'm here this weekend is to get the good sheet metal onto the car that we are trying to fix and save and keep on the road. The sequence of events is a little bit out of order from what actually happened. I was not able to record an intro back when I was performing the work, so now I'm kind of using an intro from like halfway through the actual work that's being shown in this video. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that things are a little bit out of order. Also, I'm combining about 4 months of on and off work into one video, so I'm not going to be able to talk and explain everything that I'm doing. I'm going to have to try and rush through multiple hours of content and try and cram it all into one video. I don't want this to be a 2-hour long video, so we're just going to get cooking. After removing the damaged front end in the last video, I spent some time on the salvage car trying to straighten and bend and compare measurements to try and keep and reuse as much of the sheet metal that I could, especially these parts around the headlights. Those would be a lot more complex to try and cut and weld. And to be honest, they weren't too far out of position from where they were supposed to be. So I just spent a couple hours, time-lapsed obviously to save time, to just bend them back into position, compare measurements, check if the bracing components lined up, to make sure the holes would be in the right spot, and kind of minimize how much I had to cut and weld from the donor car into the salvage car. Okay, so imagine there's a bolt in that side, and now in this side, it's close enough to bolt up, so that's the important part. Yeah, if you're ever doing something like this, just remember metal is like a spring, so it likes to hold its shape. You pull on it, it likes to just bend back to where it was, so you have to just kind of gently pull it farther than it wants to spring back to, and then you just kind of keep doing that multiple times and it'll slowly move ever so slightly, spring back less every time until it's closer to the final shape you need it to be. So now I think we're going to work on some of this front structure. Okay, for this next part, I'm focusing on kind of this side piece inside the fender, inside the headlight bucket. So we can see on the good car, we have this nice line coming down, and then this is all basically in one plane with itself. It doesn't have any more wiggles or changes kind of coming up to here. If we look on the other side, we've got kind of this part here is all the same, and then it kind of has this bump out here where it gets a little bit wider. And then if we look at the other car, we can see it has smooth, and then here it kind of gets all bumpy and it's like kinked and kind of has like a bubble out. If we look at the inside, if we remember, this whole piece is supposed to be the same plane up here, and then down here you can see it gets all kinked and wrinkled. So I'm just going to try and straighten this out and make it flat and kind of in the same plane as this piece. So for what I'm going to do is kind of just use the little hammer on this side to try and tap the dents that way. And then on the other side, use something heavy and preferably flat and kind of just hold it here so I have something to kind of stop the metal so it doesn't just, when I hit this, it doesn't just bend the whole thing in. It actually has something to brace against. So hopefully I can just get that to be flat again and be in the same plane with itself. So, since we don't have as much to measure to on that car as we do on this car, let's measure from the inside panel of the headlight bucket to the same place on this side, just going straight horizontally. You can see we're like a hair over 49.5 inches. And now, we measure the same place on this car. Carefully do this with one hand. Now if we come over to this side, inside the headlight bucket on that side, this is difficult to do one-handed. Over here on this side, we can see there's too much glare. Same thing, just over a hair over 49.5. So I think that is pretty good for the sheet metal that we still have on this car. I think everything is pretty close to where it needs to be, probably within 1/4 inch. So, like, this won't be absolutely laser perfect, but things just kind of got nudged back to where they need to be. So now, I get to try and figure out how to very delicately and carefully remove the good stuff from this car and not screw it up, because then we don't have anything to put on this car. I'm definitely not going to be able to fix this. That's just a mangled mess. So hopefully I don't mess this part up. I got this spot weld cutter from Harbor Freight, 3/8 spot weld cutter. It's the only size that they have. But for this car, it looks like it's going to work for what we're trying to do. You just use a punch. You don't have to do like a whole pilot hole. You can just use like a regular center punch just right in the middle of the wherever the spot weld is. It's like if we look down here, you can see there's like one right there and one right there. So you would just try and mark it in the center. And then it's got this spring-loaded point in the middle of the cutter to help keep it from moving around. And then it just kind of cuts around where the spot weld is. And then you can see this is like 3 layers of sheet metal. So you don't have to go all the way through, you just have to go through like however many layers you need. And now for a quick lesson on spot welding. Spot welding is performed with a spot welder because it uses jaws to clamp and run current and weld in one spot at a time. It does this by clamping together multiple layers of sheet metal, sometimes just 2, but it could be 3, 4, 5 layers of sheet metal. And it runs current through the metal that you are welding. The resistance to current of the material actually causes the material to heat up and melt, and then between the molten material and the pressure of the spot welding clamps, you are actually fusing or forging that material into a nugget or a spot of just solid metal connecting all the layers together. So with the spot weld cutter, what we're doing is kind of just cutting around that solid bridge that's connecting between the multiple layers of sheet metal so that we can then separate them. The spot weld cutter is nice because you don't have to drill through the entire solid nugget of welded material in the middle. You can kind of just cut around it, which is quicker and easier. There's less material to remove. So that's what I ended up doing with this project. I first went around the car and cleaned all the dust and dirt off so I could easily identify where the spot welds were. Then I went around and marked and center punched all of the spot welds, kind of just eyeballing as best I could. I tried using it without a center hole, just using like that spring-loaded tip in the divot created by the punch, and it kind of worked, but it kind of popped out really easily if you're not drilling on something that's perfectly flat. And the front of this car has some like curves and slopes to it, so it was really difficult for the punch to stay centered and not just go moving off in one direction if it caught a little bit too much on one side. So I ended up drilling a small pilot hole just kind of through the center of the weld to keep the tool aligned so it wouldn't move around while I was cutting. And this process worked pretty well. Just go around and punch all of the spot welds, drill, and then go back and cut around until eventually the front end was separated. So here's my plan for how I'm going to do this. I want to put the sheet metal piece up to the front of the car and make sure all of the sheet metal is going to mate up and be flat because this was pushed back. I kind of manually pulled stuff forward to get it close to where the measurements need to be. But I want to make sure it's going to be a nice flat surface for when we try and go and re-weld all the spot welds. I'm also going to have to do some prep to this panel and that panel so we have good, clean, bare steel to weld to. So the weld's going to stick. And then we also need to do some paint and primer and or seam sealer to figure out how to keep it from rusting in between the layers of sheet metal after it's welded together. So I'm going to take a lot of the front end components like the headlights, probably set the fenders back on there, maybe get the radiator and kind of loosely assemble things in the place they're going to be. And then kind of adjust this piece to where it needs to be with all the other components, and then we can actually like start attaching it. I've gone off on a little side quest. I was gathering parts for the front end, and we can see this is the air conditioning condenser, and it is very much a U-shape. So this is not going to be usable on our new car if we want to have functioning air conditioning. So I got this one. This was a used one off of eBay. But we can see this bracket here has been cut off. It's flipped around right now. Yeah, you can see this one. All the fins are flattened. It's one of these is straight, one of these is not. Anyway, but we have this bracket. This holds the hose that comes from the AC compressor up to the top of the condenser. So I mean, it's not super necessary. It just kind of holds it in place and keeps all the vibration from going into this fitting and eventually like cracking it. So it is somewhat useful. And this one, you can see it's got some saw marks. I don't think that's just a clean break. I think someone cut that off to get this out. But I'm gonna try and just transfer this bracket over to that one. So quick little side quest, hoping I don't screw anything up majorly, but yeah, we'll see. I tried to drill the spot welds, but that wasn't working. I ended up snapping the teeth on the cutter. So I'm just gonna cut and do a straight butt weld on this. So we're just gonna solve it with violence. Should have done this the first time. Well, they may not be the prettiest welds in the world, but they sure are functional, so good enough. Okay, so yesterday I did a bunch of work. It didn't always seem obvious, but I was making steady progress. I did a lot of cleaning, so I can kind of touch things without getting instantly covered in oil. Even after trying to wash it down in that previous video, there's still a lot of oil residue on a lot of things. So I just did a little bit of extra cleaning off camera. I also assembled a lot of the parts that we are going to need to check the front end fitment when we offer up the good sheet metal. So we've got the AC condenser, we've got our replacement radiator. This one is actually from an XR2, so the radiator is thicker, which I slightly improved cooling is not a bad thing. It still fits in the chassis, so it does what it's designed to do. The only extra thing is it has these oil cooler ports on the bottom for the transmission. Since this is a base model or a non-turbo, the manual transmission does not have oil coolers. I don't know if the automatic transmission needs an oil cooler, but the manual transmission that's in the turbo cars, the XR2s, that is a different transmission than the regular manual transmissions. So those do have oil coolers. This one does not have an oil cooler. That's not going to hurt anything. We'll just put some caps over it so it doesn't get dust and dirt inside it. But the passages don't connect, so I don't have to worry about coolant mixing with things it doesn't need to mix with. We have our working radiator fan. The one that was on this car originally got folded in pretty bad, so the blades couldn't spin freely. All these things were kind of folded in around it. This is the fan for the AC condenser. It's here, so we can use that. We have some of the front brackets. We've got our headlights put back together, and we have our marker lights, so we can line everything up. We'll grab the fenders. Right now, I just have the front end sitting on a jack, so I can kind of hold it here. And we're gonna try and just put it on the car, see if I can rest it on these studs for where the bumper bolts up, and see if that can kind of hold it in place. And we'll just see how difficult this is gonna be to hold, and then start lining things up. If we come over here, we can see where it lines up. That is where the old spot weld used to be, or in this case, the old sheet metal screw used to be. We've got a little bit of gap, but remember this was pushed way back, so I kind of just manually pulled this forward until the distance from here to the firewall matched our measurement roughly, but that can be massaged further up so we can have a nice clean line here where that needs to be. If we come to the front where this meets up, we can see there were 2 spot welds that were drilled out, and then 3 kind of on this flat flange. So this front piece is pushed in a little bit, so it's not quite lining up. But it's close. It's within a 1/4 inch, so it's not too difficult to try and line back up. Here we can see the holes almost line up on top. Back here we can try and pull it back out this way until it meets and covers up that lighter gray primer color. On the front we can see, oh, don't fall over. These are where the studs for the bumper go. So I just have those resting in the holes where they should have been, and they're kind of tight to the edge, so I might open these up a little bit just to make setting this on here a little bit easier. But otherwise we can see it's not perfect. There's still a gap here at the bottom where this isn't all the way against the frame where it needs to be. This part wasn't damaged, so it's not like this is pushed back. I think there's something that's keeping this front piece from sitting flat back where it needs to be. So I'll look into that a little bit. If we look at the right side, we'll start here on the corner again. This, again, it's not sitting all the way back where it needs to be, but the holes are lining up pretty good as far as like front, back, side, side. Here we can see there's another big gap, but at least it's kind of centered right to left compared to the other side. This one is also sitting on the studs. One of the studs is missing, so this is kind of just floating in space right now. But again, you can see there's kind of a gap. It's not able to sit flat. So we've got probably like a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch where it's just sitting out. Kind of same situation up front. We've got a gap here where it doesn't want to sit quite flat. So I've got some adjusting to do. Because yeah, I mean it's close. Like it's not terrible, but it definitely isn't just a drop in place and weld it down. Okay, so I have the front end back on. It is held in place with a vice grip and these 2 clamps over here, and things are a lot closer. I actually was able to put some of the components back together, so we're just gonna kind of go around and see how well it fits. So starting up front, this fits pretty well. It's being held together. This gap on the side is much smaller than it was before, so we are a lot closer to being in the right position. You can see we are in the correct holes for the studs for the bumper. Down here on the front, this is basically touching. This is hard up against here. Very little gap. I mean, there's still like a tiny like little gap. But that's lining up much better. I went and put this cross brace on just loosely, and we can see that that lines up with the hole. Same thing with this front cross support thing. I don't know what that's called, but it's kind of bolted in up there. And then down here, we can see it lines up with the hole. It's just a little bit far away, so that'll just have to get tightened down. Before we had a huge gap. This is a much smaller gap now. And it's basically lining right up with where those pinch welds are. Over on this side, this is very close, right up against it, almost lining up dead square with the spot welds. I don't know if this car was welded robotically, if all the spot welds are identical from car to car. I don't think so, just because things are a little bit off. But again, I don't know with any measure of certainty. On this side, still doing pretty good. This side is like a little far that way. This gap is a little bit bigger than it was last time, but that shouldn't be a big deal. I think this part is getting a little warped just from setting on the ground and moving around. Over here, this is pretty good. Small gap, but down here we're together. It's centered side to side, and then this is supposed to line up with that hole in there, so that needs a little bit of tweaking, but it's very close. And then over on this side, we have the other bracket, the radiator, and then this bolt lines up, so we could put a bolt in there, but this side still has some gaps. So still needs some tweaking. I'll probably drop in the headlights and put the fenders on just to see if that's kind of close. The radiator dropped in no problem. The condenser for the air conditioning, it's got 1 foot on this side. Hard to see with the light. And 1 foot on this side. It's not quite in the hole on this side. And then on top, it mounts there and there. I was not able to get a bolt in that side. So it's kind of sitting at an angle. If we look at the donor car, this hole and this hole, that's where the feet go. Look, it's totally done. Just kidding, it's not done, obviously, but we have the hood on from one of the previous junkyard cars that I got some parts from. The hood isn't perfect, it's got some damage from being moved 85 times. Even installing it, I messed up a little bit, so I'll have some small things to fix, but that's okay. We've got the fenders just kind of loosely on here on both sides. We've got the front still just held on with clamps, and then headlights, I dropped those in. So let's pick this up. It's kind of a heavy hood, surprisingly. All right. So, with the hood down, there's kind of a big fender gap on this side. You can kind of see this lighter red inside, and the fender can only adjust so far inward. But we can kind of adjust the hood if we need to try and just center it in between the gap. Because it's really close on this side, that's why it's kind of touching back here. So I might need to put some washers in here just to kind of space the hood that way a tiny bit. But then coming up front, it probably doesn't look too bad on camera, but this panel gap is kind of too big. So I mean, this panel's already kind of in as far as it can go. Right here, it actually bolts to kind of this inside piece. I know it's dark, it's hard to see. So this is already kind of in as far as it can go. We can kind of like push it when we tighten the bolts down, so that'll minimize the gap. So it won't be terrible, but it'd be nice if it was a little closer. This bolt hole for the headlight is a little too rusty, so I couldn't put a bolt in there. But we can see it lines up, and we can still adjust the headlights, because that's obviously not tightened down yet, but it's in here. It looks like we'll be able to kind of play around and get even panel gaps. And then still got some adjusting to do with this part to kind of get those two together. So this might have to go a little bit that way, and then go down so it's kind of under the headlight instead of on top of the headlight. We talked about the radiator on this side. This one is also just kind of loosely in here, but the motor kind of sticks through this window. I know you literally can't see anything back here. I am sorry again for the lighting situation in the shop. But if we kind of turn this knob, we can manually run the headlight motor. And it's very slowly, but let's put it down. Keep going. Goes down a little too far. So we're gonna get a little bit again. This is adjustable, so we can again play with the panel gaps. I think the headlight looks good. This front piece, if we put it like this, you can see it's kind of off to the side, and it's just supposed to meet up nice and clean with the fender. If we look at my other car, you can see the hood is popped open, just so I don't have to go pop the hood every time, because it's kind of a narrow gap between the Mustang. But we can see the gap, the body line kind of comes around the top of the marker light, so that is even front to back. And then side to side, there's almost no gap. And then height-wise, It's kind of just a smooth transition. On the other side, same thing, almost no panel gap. So the bolt-on fenders want to be close to it. Again, this isn't absolutely perfect. It's okay if it's off by a few millimeters. I'm not trying to make a numbers matching perfect restoration here. But it's really darn close. Obviously, plenty of little paint and touch-up things to fix, but you know, for a first attempt, I'm gonna have to pat myself on the back a little bit because this is going okay. Well, I am running out of time to work in the shop this weekend. If you want to see the next video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. I upload about once a month, but I'm not on any kind of consistent schedule, so make sure you hit the notification bell to get notified whenever the video goes up. I know it might look like we're getting close to being done, but there's still plenty of work. We still have to actually prep and weld all the sheet metal, make sure we do some good rust protection, and then do all the paint, body work, and reassembly. And then we will get to go through the process of inspections and paperwork to try and make this thing road legal once again, and do all of the proper government safety inspections and everything. So if you like automotive projects like this or other weird, crazy things, definitely subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.